This is going to be my second video, also in regard to what it's like living abroad, comparison USA and Germany from a Greek perspective. I got a few questions that they said that I missed in the previous video. Was how was education? Because I didn't mention education, even though it's such an important factor. So I tried to put my some thoughts together regarding where is it better. It's hard to answer. I'm not gonna go into that really. Let me explain why. The question was how easy it is to study and stuff like that. Well, it's cheaper here to study. I can talk about that later. But when you're talking about just getting a college degree or getting a college education, the brutal truth is that it's more a cultural thing. I mean that sincerely. When I mean culturally, let's look at America and let's look at statistics. So I tried to look at this a little bit ahead of time and make sure I knew what I was talking about. I always knew this, but I had some stuff here. I looked at the Brookings Institute, National Center of Education, which is the government itself, and you see. Let's just start with because everybody talks about all these foreigners coming to the United States to study. First of all, it's the elite universities. According to this Center of Education, in fact, the elite universities in the United States have like 40%, between 25 and 50%, are actually even, foreign-born, foreign students, coming from abroad, not even like, U.S. residents or, so that's an amazing thing. But they're collecting the best from the best. It doesn't matter if they're from Malawi, Africa. You just have to be the best. So that's a different sector though. That's not everyday America, and it's not like everyday Germany going to an elite university here and getting some kind of a scholarship. I think here it's a lot lower actually, and increasing. By the way, next year, this is interesting. They're expecting an increase, especially from Indian engineers and Pakistani engineers, but especially from India, coming in from their polytechnical schools, basically engineering, computer sciences, and stuff like that, because of the whole situation in the United States of what's going on against immigration, and it's getting more difficult as a whole. But regardless of that, but I think why I said culturally, I think it's more important, a more important factor than where you are, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in Greece, or whether you're in America. Why I say that? Please look into it. A lot of my Greek American friends, they'll back me up on this because I looked at this at the Queens College. Looking at the Greek Americans, they had some great information. The Brookings Institute also had some great information on immigration and stuff like that. Things that I'd like to point out. Think about this, for example. 65% of all Asian Americans will have a college degree, the first generation. 66%. That's an amazing. You know what it is for white people? Around 40%, which is a lot, right? 40% is a lot. Blacks is about 36%. Hispanics is about 33%. They're at the bottom of the poll. But you can see basically 1 out of 3, basically Mexicans will have a college or higher education, 4 out of 10, but 6 out of 10, more than 6 out of 10, almost 7 out of 10 people from India and Pakistan, Vietnam, basically Asian Americans are just kicking butt. Koreans are up to like 75%. Hong Kong Chinese are up to like 80%. By the way, the Greeks, this would be funny. First generation, that would be like me, or my cousins, people that were born in Greece, but, came to the United States and, as little kids, and basically they were Americanized very early. They're up to also about 68%. We're like about Asian level. Now, why is that? I'll get into that later, but why the Greeks are, and those cultural factors, where education is better. It's hard to say. Those cultural influences, I think, are more important. Now, ask yourself, maybe somebody can tell me, why is it that, Indians and Vietnamese and Koreans end up having. They place such a high value on education. It's as simple as that. It's the same with first education, with the first generation. And oh, by the way, according to Queens College, the children of the first generation immigrants, that would be like my kids or my cousins, their kids, their college rate is close to 90%. Um, Now, as Greek Americans, we know our parents, a lot of them that moved to America, were completely uneducated. They were lucky to have gone to elementary school or, some kind of a trade school. My uncle, in fact, went to school till he was like 16 years old. And, he was considered among the most educated people he was probably the most educated people in his village. A town with, I don't know, at the time, maybe it had, 1,500 people. Not that many people. Um, you know, so education was difficult to obtain for those immigrants. Going to America, they realized that, they could do it. And that's why I say it like a joke, but I think my cousins and other Greek Americans will understand. Maybe Jewish Americans. Oh, by the way, they're up there too. They're like at 70%. Um, and they're also, by the way, top of the economic policies. In other words, people that are saying, oh, it's difficult in America. Well, it's not difficult for the Indian Americans. It's not difficult for the Pakistani Americans, for the Korean Americans, for the Greek Americans, for the Jewish Americans. There are certain groups that tend to live better um, in the United States. Please Google that, Brookings Institute. You can look at the income based on, ethnicity. Um, and you're thinking, why? Well, it's obviously education. You're going to make more as a plumber. If you're educated, obviously, and even if you're some kind of a bank idiot, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. You're probably making more than the plumber. Um, it's just the way it is. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. Now, why I said that, I'll close up later. It's not that way in Germany. Now, this is a strange thing. This is a compliment for the United States system. Why I'm saying that is somehow I think I know the reason. It's not the German system, but to a certain extent it is. But the German immigrants that came here, and I can relate because I've been here for 25 years now. I know, they came just like it from the United States, from small towns. When unemployment was high, you had the military dictatorship, so a lot of people were leaving politically. They came to Germany. There were jobs galore, Mercedes, VW, Audi, you name it in the car industry, especially. And but anyway, so they came here. Now, less than 20% of those kids, of the Greek German kids, had a college education. That's like, in Greece, considering in America it's 80 to 90%, that's like, 4 or 5 times likelier to have graduated from university if you were a Greek American than if you were foreign born. And let me explain why. And this is a compliment to the US, and this is based on the high school system. In Germany, you have a really weird system with all this greatness. I'm kind of like against this. I can understand it. So I've talked to teachers. I'll explain. Is um, they have, I think it's like around 10, 11 years old. They will actually pick out and say, oh, your kid is either going to Hauptschule, which means main school. If you finish main school, you can't go to an upper level college or university. Or even a technical school. What you can do is like, you can become a hairdresser. You still go to school, or a plumber, anything with a hand tool, mechanic. They're automatically putting you into that category at 11, 12 years old. I am not joking. Please, my German friends can correct me if I'm wrong. And then you have what's called the Realschule, which is a second category. The Realschule, you can go to like technical universities. It's usually very specialized at what you can do, but it's usually, schools for engineering, mathematics, and stuff like that. That would be the second level. And the third level is the gymnasium, from the Greek, gymnasio, which is the highest level. There you have access to all the universities. So they do the cut real early here. And let's be honest, I don't know what it was like when they started this system. I heard it was better in the 50s and 60s because Hauptschule, being a plumber or whatever, a hairdresser was still considered. Now it's almost like a loser. Everybody wants to, be a college educated and have a nice fancy job with a desk. So now the question is why. That's why the Greek immigrants never were able to above that to raise that level. They weren't placed like in the general high school system. Most of them actually even went to Greek schools that you only got a Hauptschule, which is really stupid of the Greek Germans to do that here. They put themselves in a ghetto. Their kids were going to Greek school, learning German. They spoke great German, but their college, they weren't eligible to go to college in Germany. They had to go back to Greece and study at a Greek university. And it's much more difficult to get into a Greek university than it is to get into a German university. Therefore, it's only 20%, which is strange. You got to admit. I mean, when it's like 70 to 90% in the Greek Americans in the United States, so you got to give plus to the U.S. on that. Now, that statistic has completely changed with third and fourth generation. It took a lot more generations for the Greek immigrants in Germany and others looking at that education to cover that up. The Greeks are no longer sending their kids to Greek schools anymore. The one where I am in Tübingen, they used to have, I think, two. They shut them both down because the Greek kids were born here. They don't want that for their children. They want their children to be able to study at a college here in Germany. So that percentage is going up. Now, here's a negative for the United States. Having said all those positives, in the United States, from the white people that are graduating, your average middle class Americans, it's like 66, 70% of their parents had a college education. So basically, if your parents have a college education, you get a college education. If your parents don't have a college education, it's difficult to get a college education, and it's difficult to break out of that system than it is in Europe, which is purely academic based and not financially based. Like even if your kid has the academic credentials of, going to a UConn or UMass, or he just, parents can't afford that, or the kid has to go and have, a couple $100,000 in debt. I know it sounds, too good to be true. It's just not that way here. Yes, it costs money. When I mean it costs money, my daughter went to college here in Germany, Ulm, and then she also went to Bulgaria. It was all funded, but she needed an apartment. She needed, money. You still have to send money. So that was for higher education. So it's easier to, not having like a college education to become a doctor here. You'll see kids that are doctors. What do your parents do? Oh, they're plumbers. It doesn't happen as much in the U.S. Altogether, though, I said society is more important. It's the same here in Germany. I think this is the same in Germany. It's like 65 to 75% of all the white kids graduating, their parents had a college education. And therefore, they put emphasis on their children having a college education as well. Not that that's everything, by the way. I'll get to that now. Now, my son went to that's kind of difficult. It's a Realschule, where you can go to the university. So, he could have gone to any university he went. He decided to do a trade. Now, listen to this. This is where Germany kicks butt. My son decided to become a carpenter. It's a 3-year profession here. The first year he went to school, I'm just, basically, making it simple, but the first year he was going to school, I think 3 days to 4 days a week and working 1 or 2 days a week. And he was getting already like around $900 to $1,000. I'm sorry, euros. Yeah, I'm serious. He was getting paid. The second year, went up to about, I think, 1,100. The third year, he went up to 1,300. So he got his degree as a carpenter the whole 3 year. And by the way, it's a licensed profession here. Not everybody can call themselves a carpenter. You have to have a license. You have to be registered. In Germany, I think you have to have a license to, do anything, clean toilets. You have to get some kind of a license. But, I'm serious, by the way. I'm not just, it's a joke, but it isn't at the same time. But, afterwards, where he was done, their placement record is like 70-80%. So if you're like into like electrotechnique, airport technology for jet motors that they do here a lot, what they also call mechatronic, which is like a mechanical and electrical engineering kind of schools that they do here, you make good money. Right now, it's the opposite. My German friends can verify this. Probably the same in America. Like you call up a carpenter and you say, I need a fence. They'll just laugh at you. They're like, no, they got bigger projects than doing a fence. And they're not going to do it for, $20 to $30 an hour. These guys want like $50, $60 an hour just to show up and, look at the place. So things are changing. But yeah, that's about it. I think I gave you a pretty good overview of the two systems. of basically the advantages and disadvantages. But like I said, I think the most important is obviously the cultural level. And like I said, ask yourselves, why is it that Vietnamese immigrants that came from the jungle after war in 1973? I read that particularly, and they had college graduations of like over 88%, of which, listen to this, 2 out of 3 had like a master's or a PhD. Think about that. Their parents were illiterate. Most of them, they came as nobodies, kind of. A lot of my Greek American friends know that. They knew how we grew up. It was never that easy. But my joke is, we never thought we wouldn't go to college. You see what I'm trying to say? It was like, you're not a man until you get your degree. Most of you would say, well, you're expected to go to high school. Well, yeah, you graduate high school. Well, it was more than just graduating high school. I mean, not only was it normal that I would graduate high school. It was normal that I would graduate elementary school. For my parents, it was like normal that I was going to go to college. They saw no other thing. And I think that's basically the difference, and what makes a better educational system. It's basically the teachers that are there, the people that are there, and, concentrating on what you want. And that's what's going to educate. And, like I said, it's the system is important, but the USA does a fantastic job for that. But you got to give the European credits of being able to jump out of that. Like basically, like I said, you can jump out and become a doctor, even if you're coming from the lowest level of society. So all you have to do. So you got to give them that credit. And, I'll be honest. And even if they do get student loans because their parents are deadbeats and they can't afford their an apartment or college dorm, the government will support them. It's something called BAföG. And yeah, they'll support him. They'll pay for his apartment. They'll even give him a couple of extra €100 for his books and everything like that. So the system is way, 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 way better when it's open to everybody. I know that everybody thinks in America that I don't understand why, having lived abroad so long, that we can't do that in America for some reason. It's kind of strange because here it's like, the government pays for elementary schools, they pay for middle schools, junior high schools, they pay for high schools, and then they pay for college. For some reason, America, we just stopped that right there. We just stop at high school. From now on, it's a privilege. And let's think about that as how much value that has in society. And that's it, everybody. That was a long video. Bye.